Yes, so we
Why
can
don't we,
start.
why don't we proceed? Because in our usual fashion, it's a hefty agenda. So let me open this April 19th meeting of the Finance, Facilities and Technologies Committee and ask Ellen to call the roll.
Certainly. Good morning. Trustee Kane.
Yes, here.
I haven't seen Trustee Donnelly yet.
No, I haven't.
Trustee Irwin.
Here.
Trustee Gardner. Trustee Cates. Trustee McMahon.
Here.
Trustee Martin.
Yes, here.
Trustee Riley.
Here?
Trustee Rotundo.
Here.
We
Great.
just have 6, so we have a quorum.
Okay, everybody stay with us. Let's hope nobody's internet goes. Here we go. Could I have a motion for the FFT Committee of the Board of Trustees to go into executive session under the provisions of 1 MRSA Section 4056A to discuss the evaluation of personnel and the consideration and discussion of appointments, evaluations, employment, and duties, and 1 MRSA Section 4056-C to discuss the condition, acquisition, or disposition of real property or economic development if premature disclosure of the information would prejudice the competitive or bargaining positions of the UMS. Could I have a motion?
So moved, David.
Moved by David, seconded by
Second.
Peggy. And Ellen, could you take the roll?
Certainly. Trustee Kane.
Yes.
Trustee Irwin.
Yes.
Trustee McMahon.
Yes.
Trustee Martin.
Yes.
Trustee Riley.
Yes.
Trustee Rotundo.
Yes.
The motion is carried.
And we stay right. Oh, no. Okay, good.
Here, Rowena.
Yes.
I think it's tomorrow.
Are we back up? Ready, Helen? Okay. Good morning again, everybody, and welcome to the FFT meeting. We're happy to have everyone here and remind everybody to please mute if you're not speaking. We have an extraordinarily busy schedule of very important issues today, as is usual for this committee, so I would beg our presenters to be as precise as possible. We've allocated almost an hour for Q&A that will sprinkle throughout the day to make sure that members get their questions answered, but I want to move quickly through this, making sure that we do have enough time for conversation. So with that, let me turn to our first item, and it is academic partnerships with Vice Chancellor Placido.
And I will just turn it directly over to Carolyn Dorsey.
Okay. Hi, Carolyn.
Hi, good morning. Let me see, I'll share my screen, hopefully. So I believe you're all seeing the academic partnership slide. So I wanted to take a few minutes today and give you an overview of the academic partnerships agreement. As you know, there are 3 campuses currently working with academic partnerships. They're an online program management firm that we went into agreement with in 2019 to help us try and develop, grow those online programs, especially the sort of online accelerated 6 starts a year, the little bit more innovative way of reaching the adult learner, and some of the, especially the programming that the workforce was asking us to try and roll out to these groups. So what I'd like to do today is just give you a brief update of the enrollments, what we've seen since 2019, and then what they're projecting for the upcoming year, and just a little bit about the services that they offer, so you can have a general idea of the type of services that our campuses are receiving from AP. So initially, when the conversation started, it was 2 campuses that were going to join with AP, USM, and UMFK. AP typically works with graduate online programming. They don't have a large undergraduate portfolio. So this is just a quick snapshot of some of the programming. USM has graduate education, graduate programming in education and in nursing. UMFK, some undergraduate, but graduate in nursing. And as you know, recently they were approved to create a couple of additional graduate programs in the nursing field. So those are the areas for those campuses. But when AP started to talk with the system and realized that UMPI had a competency-based program, while it was undergraduate, and again, as I said, they don't typically work with undergraduate very much, they had not really had a lot of experience in CBE, and they wanted to break into that market. So they asked if UMPI could be included into their portfolio. And UMPI started with one business administration related program, but as you can see from the slide, has developed numerous additional undergraduate programs in several different academic areas. So that's just a quick glimpse of sort of the academic portfolio that we're offering. The next 3 slides, this is something actually that AP has provided to the campuses during a yearly review. It's split in 2, as you can see. The top is the total enrollment growth from 2019 up through the end of last year. One thing that I will say, not so much in what you're going to see in these slides, but sometimes when you look at some of the information AP offers, they base everything on their calendar year. Everything they provide us is a snapshot of a calendar year. We do a lot more on the academic year. So if you're trying to compare numbers to something you may have from, you know, our team, it may look a little bit off, but you just have to make sure you're comparing the same period of time. But you can see that there's been some pretty steady growth in their enrollments, a little bit of a dip around early 2021, which would be expected with COVID. A lot of people were making decisions about their academic, you know, whether they were going to go to school, whether they're going to take courses. So each one of the campuses has a little bit of a dip in that same time period. But really overall, even through COVID, these enrollments held strong and grew in some cases, especially in the case of UMPI's CBE program. So as you can see, the top bar represents total enrollment, or I'm sorry, the top graph represents total enrollment. The bottom is the new starts every session. So as I mentioned earlier, there are 6 starts a year. They are 8-week sessions, accelerated online, and you can see each 8-week session how many new students they bring in. Something that I'd like to note on here, that when we're talking about those extra starts, you can see that in March and October, there is quite a bump. It's really one of the larger semesters or sessions where students come in. So having those extra starts have really offered the campuses an opportunity to bring in more students that they wouldn't have brought in the traditional academic year. So this is USM's total. The next is UMPI's total. Again, you can see a pretty steady increase with the exception of the sort of dip around COVID and their new starts. And then the final one will be University of Maine at Fort Kent. Theirs is a little bit different. It started a bit slower, had some ups and downs, but they are clearly now working at some accelerated numbers. This slide is just giving you a quick look at the previous year enrollments, and then in the blue, and then the orange is the projected. So these, we have received these projected numbers from AP. I will say that in the past, they have always met their projections. That is one thing, that whatever they do offer us for a projected total, they do meet it. However, I do feel that the projections at times have been a bit low. We'd prefer to see some increase in newer enrollments, overall program numbers across the board, but you can see there is at least a 30% growth projected at each of the campuses over the next year. And again, the totals for each, and then the system as a whole. This slide just gives you a basic snapshot of the general service areas that they offer as part of that 50-50 tuition revenue split. Marketing, recruitment, promotion, quite self-explanatory. They have taken over the bulk of the marketing and recruitment promotion. They work with each of the campuses and attempt to align all of the different materials that they use with whatever the other more traditional programming might look like. The second, the program development, support, and implementation really talks about the general level of service that they offer. They have a project manager that I meet with at least weekly. They have teams that still continue to meet with each of the campuses. I believe on a weekly basis, depending on the topic. The general marketing and recruitment meet most frequently. Academic support services, at times it might be weekly, but depending on where they are in development, it may be monthly. But they do have a team that is assigned to each campus, a unique team based on the curriculum that they're offering and where they're at in the rollout process. And that's what they sort of group under that program development, support, and implementation bullet. Academic support services are those folks that come in with instructional design background. They help with some of the curriculum development, how you would convert a traditional course into an accelerated online program. Again, that's a fairly active group with our campuses. Enrollment specialist representatives are those people who help with admissions, talk to the students basically from that initial marketing outreach until they are enrolled in the program, and there's a sort of soft handoff to admissions. Again, each campus does it a bit differently in the role that this person or people would play. And actually, USM and I believe now UMFK also have a dedicated field representative that is out doing some of that marketing in the field for them. Application support, again, that's part of that sort of admissions area. And then student support services, which would be really what we would consider sort of our retention specialists and folks that are working with students once they are actually enrolled and in that program moving forward to completion. So those are the 6 areas. They're very well developed in what the services are, although I will say that in some of them, we have not fully realized the services or are not using the services from that area at all, simply because they don't align with either what we're doing academically or their infrastructure doesn't align with ours in a way that allows it to be an efficient process if they're the ones picking up that piece of the work. This slide, I wanted to focus in just a little bit on their marketing and recruitment. And I realize I've given you 3 sort of small snapshots and you can't see the rest of the state. So the rest of the country. So you'll have to take my word on how it is sort of spaced out with the different enrollment numbers. But what you're looking at is on the very first upper left, that is USM. It's a snapshot of last year where their actual enrollments came from. There are a few other red dots or green dots scattered throughout the map with the rest of the country, but primarily most of their enrollments, as you can see, came from the state of Maine. To the right of that is the University of Maine at Fort Kent. Again, much of the folks that they're recruiting are coming from the state of Maine, a very few spaced out throughout the rest of the country. I did not include UMPEs. I wanted to show something different from their marketing perspective, but theirs was very similar. They have a bit more students that are coming from across the country and internationally. So there's a spread out just a teeny bit more, but for the most part, a lot of the enrollments that we are receiving are coming from Maine and New England. And I think that is one area of concern for the campuses. While they appreciate the numbers, they do wish that they were having a bit more of a broad reach across the country or perhaps internationally where it is an online program. But I will say that clearly you can tell by looking, especially, if you're looking at that UMFK slide, those are students that we weren't reaching. The University of Maine system was not reaching with their traditional programming. So, it may be quite centralized within our New England area, but again, there's students that perhaps would not have come to the University of Maine system had this marketing effort not been put into place. So the very bottom of that slide, this is an example of the 4 sort of general areas that AP has for their marketing and recruitment toolbox. You can see organic marketing, digital marketing, field sales, and the more traditional sort of advertising, radio, TV, newspaper. And the reason I thought it was interesting to put this in is while they are really responsible for nearly 100% of the marketing and outreach on these AP related programs, they're only using a few of the tools in their toolbox. They use almost nothing from field sales or the traditional area. They're really heavily focused on using websites and paid word searches through Google and Google Ads and things like that. So again, an area that we have attempted to get them to expand on, but they're just really heavily focused on those few areas for their recruitment. So that is really all that I put in for slides. I know everyone on the screen has a different level of understanding and experience with AP. So I wanted to give just sort of a general academic portfolio and enrollment picture, and then open it up to any questions that folks might have. I thought that might be a more efficient use of time. So I'll stop screen sharing so folks can see each other. Any questions?
Carolyn, David McMahon, just so I understand the numbers, what you showed on your slide, which I show as 10 out of 61, the blue and the orange bars.
Mm-hmm.
The blue bar is cumulative enrollment for 19, 20, and 21, and the orange bar is cumulative enrollment for 19, 20, 21, and 22. Is that my understanding?
No, that is actually, it's new enrollment projections. So it isn't cumulative enrollment over the course of the year. It's new students that will be brought into the pipeline. So when they offer their enrollment projections, that's how they would offer it, the percent of new students they'll bring in each year. So if you're would you like me to bring the slide back up?
No, I just wanted to understand the numbers. So if I looked at USM, the blue bar is 236, the orange bar is 310. So is that 74 new students?
No, it will be 310 new students projected in the calendar year of yeah. And the reason that as you look at the enrollment growth, the reason that it doesn't align with that new students is there's a certain percentage every session that will either graduate or would, for whatever reason, stop out and not enroll. So it doesn't show up and be consistently higher by that much every time. It's an up and down based on these new people that are enrolling and those who have completed the program or stop out. But that 310 number will be new people coming into the pipeline in one calendar year for USM.
And do we have data on retention and graduation rates as well, as opposed to just recruitment?
Yes, we do. The campuses have that information. The one that I am a little bit more familiar with would be UMPI, because I was more familiar with their CBE program. Their retention rates were up over 70%, I think closer to 80%, which is above the national average, which the national average lingers around 72 to 75% for that type of competency-based programming for adults. They were very close to 80% at one time last year, so above the national average. The students do tend to stop out from semester to semester. If there are 6 sessions, they may, on average, take 4, but for one reason or another, have to take one of those sessions off throughout the year. And as far as graduation rates, I do know that they are above the average of the traditional programs at the campuses, but just slightly.
Any other questions? That I would remind us that this meeting is sort of a treasure trove of information addressing questions we've raised in past meetings. So it's very focused on addressing those. Anything else for Carolyn?
Chair Riley? Yeah,
Yep.
one comment. One thing that Caroline showed was the information on where we were seeing our applicants come in. Because Academic Partnerships is doing the recruitment for us, what we don't have access to right now is where they might have inquiries, where some of the advertising and marketing might actually generate some interest. We've been requesting that data from Academic Partnerships for quite some time. They have not yet fulfilled that, but that would be an excellent piece of the puzzle for us to really rely on to figure out where our programs might have market potential. So I'm hoping that next time we share an update on this, we'll be able to share that information with you.
Great, thanks, David. That would be very useful. Anybody
Chairman
else?
Riley,
President Cummings?
thank you. I just wanted to say thank you, Carolyn, for your presentation. There are a couple non-monetary benefits to AP that we looked at in the short run that I thought it's worth emphasizing. One is the 7-week courses and how attractive they are. And I just want to say, with the main tourist season now going into Columbus or the Indigenous Peoples Day, we are finding a lot of tick up, as Carolyn said, in that October session, because people are moving out of the tourism and hospitality workplace, and having those 7-week courses definitely sees an uptick. The other thing is the support system that AP has is not something that, at least at USM, we've been rich enough to be able to do that sort of dramatic kind of follow-up and consistency around recruiting. That's a lot of extra personnel, and so there is an advantage around consistency. We too, as UMPI, are seeing a larger amounts of retention and completion, not huge increases, but definitely solid compared to some of our more traditional classes. The final thing was that profitability was seen in the long run for this particular program by us. In other words, we wanted to establish, and we knew that profitability would be marginal. It would not be significant. That's been consistent, but that eventually we would be able to take back over as the contract ended. We'd be able to take these programs into a higher level of profitability and build on what we had learned. So I just want to kind of put that in the context of, there are short-term, obviously there's some short-term discussions about profitability. I won't go into those here, but I think looking at the long-term, the impact on best practices in the support system, I think is something just to keep in the larger mind, as opposed to just the pure profitability.
Thanks, Glenn. Anybody else? Questions on AP? Okay, thank you, Carolyn and Robert. Let's move on to the FY23 fuel and electricity budget. And do I turn direct, Ryan, do you want to set this up, or?
I think I'm turning this right over to Rudy Gabrielson.
Great, then let me introduce Rudy Gabrielson, the Chief Procurement Officer, and I think he's joined by Rachel Piper, Strategic Sourcing Director. Rudy?
Thanks so much. Should be sharing my screen. Excuse me. Rachel Piper is our Director of Sourcing and the lead on energy. She's not available today, so with her crib notes, I'll be presenting on her behalf, along with Chip Gavin, who's going to back me up as questions come up. So we wanted to quickly touch base on kind of a follow-up on the budget reports and talk a little bit about energy, because that is an area that we're watching closely, and as you know, really has an impact on budgets. There's two key things that we really do to help manage our utility and our fuel costs. One is that we had a competitive bid and brought in CES as our utility advisor. They work with our campuses and really work on both hedging and advising us on how we should do budgets. So I think every CBO on this call has either worked with or really benefited from our relationship with CES. That was done through a competitive bid. As you know, our current situation is that our costs are hedged, but there's things that are out of our control. And our total electric budget is showing an increase for fiscal year 23, which is about a 9% increase year over year. Wanted to touch base on some of the things that are driving those costs. One is natural gas costs as you may know, are significantly higher, especially in areas where they're unhedged. We've had success in the past on some of those areas to save money. Certainly the current situation did not anticipate both a pandemic and some of the world events happening. Liquid fuel are all expected to go higher. Electric expenses in the CMP territory specifically is expecting to have a jump on delivery charges. That's the one area that we don't have control over. Biomass costs, those are locked specifically for Fort Kent and Farmington, where we have a significant biomass for our fuel costs. So while they're locked, we're expecting that we're going to be using more biomass, so there may be increase there. And everyone is well aware that there's a lot of volatility in our commodity markets with what's going on in Ukraine and elsewhere in the world. This is an example of really what we're seeing in kind of and how it really varies from campus to campus. In Fort Kent, where we use pellets as our primary source, it's a reduction. At USM, we're looking at an increase. A lot of that is the delivery cost. At UM, an increase, which has somewhat to do with our hedge, but also a significant variable there is that there's a new building going online. And so the budget is certainly anticipating some of the costs as we bring that building online. We're going to continue working with CES. We can certainly make Andy Price, the president of CES, who we meet with on a regular basis, available for a deep dive into any of these numbers and the situation, as well as Rachel when she's available. The remaining part of the deck, we went through the budget just to show that the numbers that we're talking about and the numbers in the budget that you presented, that they're footed to the work that CES is doing. And with that, I know that time is really short. I think we're given 5 minutes to do this, and we're already a couple minutes behind. But I want to make sure that that we talked about what our strategies are, how we work with the campuses and with CES, and certainly can be available if there's any questions or more information is needed.
Thank you, Rudy, and thanks to Trustee McMahon, who's been doing some behind the scenes investigation on some of these issues. Remember, this was the issue of the differences in budget allocations for energy costs, and this has been very informative. And if you could take down your screen, I could see if we have any questions. Any questions from committee members? Excellent job. You nailed it. Thank you very much. We will move on. Later in the agenda, we'll be talking about the capital plan. We've had as a committee, lots of interest in issues of infrastructure and how to right size the system. And one of those key issues is space reduction. And I will turn to Ryan.
Thank you, Trustee Riley. I just wanted to kick this off, and then we'll switch over to Carolyn. Just as a reminder and a little bit of context, facilities, obviously, but space in particular has been a priority for the trustees for a while, going back to kind of the original administrative review that Trustee Fournier and Trustee Carl Turner led a number of years ago. And one of the things that the trustees focused on back then was space reduction, looking at opportunities when space had outlived its usefulness, to take that down. We do know, however, that it's expensive to take space down. We found that out on a number of occasions. So we committed centrally a number of years ago from dollars that were saved as part of these administrative reviews, somewhere between 850,000 and 1.5 million a year, depending on our individual budget circumstances in a particular year. And so that is the amount that we've dedicated to these efforts. We've used a combination of leverage those dollars with campus dollars. But as we start moving away from some of these kind of smaller structures that we've been removing, and we start talking about things like, like the demo that we did at Machias a number of years ago. Imagine the law school, the dorms on the Gorham campus at USM. Now you're starting to get into some really high 7-figure numbers that makes it a little bit more challenging with budgets. And so Carol and Nate will talk a little bit about where we are and the success that we've had. But one of the things that I wanted to at least preview, because I don't think we've had many conversations with this committee about it, is one of the things that we're looking at potentially, early in the 2024 budget development, which shockingly is only a few months away. One of the things that we're looking at is the possibility of leveraging those dollars we have into a larger revenue bond. So, imagine if we had 1.5 million a year, we turn that into a $15 million revenue bond, and then that would give us a large infusion of dollars to potentially go out and really move the needle on some of these larger space issues. And so you'll see a reference to that, but did want to preview that piece for the committee. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Carolyn.
Thank you, Ryan. Good morning, everyone. Just give you a brief overview of what we're talking about. So the materials in the book represent, an overview and a review of where we are and what the process, the Space Reduction Initiative is. Starting with, as Ryan just talked about, where the money comes from. And as he mentioned, that this strategic investment funds that the system have put toward this initiative also get matched with campus funds as the costs increase. In the guide review, you'll see it talks about the first $100,000 of any removal project being covered with this funding, and then beyond that, the campus covers 1 to 2 match from the system, up to a the initial maximum for that was up to $1 million in system funds. We've just recently changed to propose that go up to $2 million to help get at some of those larger projects, as Ryan mentioned. The other piece of this information that's provided talks about how is that distribution of those funds decided, and basically comes from the campuses. I put out a call to the campus CBO and facilities offices looking at the low usage, low quality, and campus priority buildings. Through that process, we've already identified over around 650,000 square feet of potential space that could be removed. The process hasn't been moving quite as quickly as one would hope, but we're certainly making progress. As you can see in our current status, we've removed over 92,000 square feet, 18 structures, and only spent a little over $1 million of the 3.4 that's been available to us to date. As I said, there's over 650,000 square feet that's been identified as potential, but along with that comes the financial matching money from the campuses, especially those larger projects, as Ryan mentioned, like Dickey Wood, USM, and the law building, that are expected to cost well over the $2 million that the system would match. And we're working with the campuses, and we'll continue to do that. I will be putting out another request for an update to the removal plans to the campuses in the coming month, and hope to renew that initiative, although we are continuing to remove some of those buildings right now. A few of them just came down over the last 4 months, so we're continuing as we go. And there's a history of updates that we've provided.
Great, thank you. Questions on space reduction? Anybody? Roger, Trustee Cates?
Thanks, Madam Chairman. Couple of questions, maybe the first one's for Ryan. So the $14 million potential bond you're talking about characterized as a revenue bond. And so what would be the revenue source that would pay it back?
Yeah, the revenue in this case would be the annual dollars that we set aside for demolition. So as part of the budgets that you approve, there's again, it varies a little bit between 850,000 and 1.5, but imagine 1.5 is in there. We just commit that 1.5 as an appropriation for the next 10 years against the debt service.
Okay, gotcha. And the other question I had, I take it that all dilapidated buildings are not created equal, and some of them cost more to maintain if you don't tear them down than others. How does that play into a decision of which buildings to take down? A building may be standing there and costing $10,000 a year to make sure it doesn't collapse on someone, and another building may be far more expensive. Do we know those things?
Definitely, the campus facilities especially will have a good understanding of what the building is costing them. If it's vacant, that's all the more reason that it's easier to take it down, assuming you can afford the cost of taking it down. But a lot of times once they're vacant, we've also done a lot of work to reduce those costs of keeping it standing. Like the Dickey Wood project in Gorham, we've mentioned a few times, has been shuttered for a number of years, and it's not heated any longer, and so the cost to actually keep it standing is minimal. One of the costs that add to the removal of it, however, is the fact that a lot of the campus utilities go through the building, or have a hub at the building, and so in order to remove the building, we'll have to relocate or handle the utilities that go through it. So.
What's that? Other questions? Space reduction questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. And we will move on to reserve balance updates, a question that was stimulated by our review of budgets. Brian?
I was just going to say, I think that's actually me. So as the chair noted, we had some questions during the March budget presentation about the status of reserves. A number of campuses were using reserves to balance out the 2023 budget. Just as many campuses would love to have had reserves to help balance that 23 budget. And so we wanted to provide you an update on where the campuses are in relation to reserves. We talked previously, you won't see it here, we've talked previously about the system amounts. And so just as a quick reminder there, based on what we've recommended for 2023, for 2020, to finish out 22 and going into 23, the system had a remaining budget stabilization fund balance of about 10 million. Unfortunately, we're trending towards losing most of that because of market returns. The last update I did for the board, I think we were down nearly $8 million, which would all but wipe out what we have remaining in the system budget stabilization fund. What you're seeing on your screen now is the individual campus amounts. And so just to walk you down through this one, you can see the balances at the end of 6/30/21. We put together two estimates, again, because you were looking at the 22 budget as well as the 23 budget. If those budgets passed as we've recommended, and there are no changes between now and the finish line, and there, quite frankly, there often are changes between now and the finish line. This would show you where each of the campuses would end up. So again, you can see here that we'll use Orono since they're first on the list, and Machias, starting out at 44 million, going into fiscal year 22, 37 million at the end of that budget, and then using the 12 million that is part of the 2023 budget conversations, that gets you down to that balance of 25 million. What we added at the bottom, you've heard us reference this a few times, it came up in the March presentations, is we have a recommendation for the campuses that's actually included in the APL, and we recommend that ideally, a campus we had a short-term and a longer-term goal. So in the short term, it would be great if we could all get to, roughly that 10% reserves as a percentage of the operating budget. Then the long-term goal was to get to that 18% number. So you see here individually where the campuses are. Let me just tackle a couple of the obvious questions. The law school doesn't have reserves. I'm sure the dean we'd all love to get to the point where we see some numbers in there. We're not there yet, but that's why you see nothing in that column. You also see a couple of campuses with negative reserves. Presque Isle, a smaller amount, and a really large amount at Farmington. Those are a product of, I'm not going to remember the actual years. I should have made that note. I can certainly follow up, but in the 18, 19, 20, 17, and in that kind of window, Farmington was going through some budget challenges, as it has since about the 2015 budget. And we had a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, where the campus wasn't getting any system funds, but ended the year in a deficit situation. So that goes in, that puts them into the negative. We've managed to stabilize that number. It's an ugly number, but we have stabilized it for the last couple of years. Obviously, the long-term goal there is to kind of chip away at that and eventually get back to the to the point where we can remove the parentheses around those negative numbers and see a little bit a better number there. But that's where we are both before and after the 2022 and 23 budgets, and happy to answer any questions on that topic.
Thanks, Ryan. Questions on this sobering presentation? Any questions? Okay, thank you, Ryan. Oh, sorry, did I say something? Oh,
quick question.
Trustee Bartholomew.
And Ryan, can you just give us some background narrative? $7.5 million in the hole for this new budget. How is that historically speaking? Has that changed a lot, or is that consistent over the last couple of years?
Which number? The 7.5 that Farmington had, or
Farmington?
Yeah, that's been the same number for probably I think the system has provided support maybe the last 3 budgets, and so it hasn't got bigger over the last 3 years. But as you would imagine, when you're operating in a deficit situation, even if they get back, even over the last 3 years, as they've got back to a balanced budget, if let's pretend they generated a surplus of $500,000 in a year, the way the board policy and the way we handle system transfers is we only transfer what is needed to balance the budget. And so in years where a campus is getting system funds, if they're in a negative situation, and no matter how well they do, they're not going to chip away at that because we'll transfer less if they do better. So it really needs to be part of a kind of a planned effort, getting back to the point where you've got a balanced revenue and expense side of the house, and then ideally start to generate some modest surpluses to chip away at that. We've had a few campuses that have been in that situation that have managed to get back to the positive side. But, I'll be honest, it's really difficult when the number is that large.
Okay, thank you. And
Chair?
I'm not- Yep. Oh, hello, Chair Gardner. I'm afraid I can't see everyone, so just jump in.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. I have a question on the reserves for Ryan as well. Ryan, I'm trying to remember, are these reserves also available for capital at the campuses?
Yeah, so several of the campuses, I think what you're seeing on the spreadsheet is, kind of what we would refer to as the campus version of the budget stabilization fund. Campuses will often have capital reserves. So this would just be those dollars generally that would help a campus out for key one-time investments, budget balancing. Doesn't mean there's not a possibility of transferring funds over from reserves, but one of the policies that we've put in place since the chancellor's been on board is making sure that when we take reserve dollars and set them into capital, that we spend them on capital. We have a history of putting reserves aside for capital projects and then pulling them back out. So I think I answered your question there. Yes.
Well, maybe you did kind of, Ryan, maybe for clarity. So these reserve dollars here are designated for use only as budget stabilizations, and there's other reserve dollars somewhere else for capital?
But budget stabilization and other kind of key one-time investments. And so think about you may have a project on campus where you need an infusion of dollars. These would be available for that as well, but not so much capital unless you transferred them over.
Okay, because the only reason the Farmington number kind of jogged my memory. If I remember right, Farmington had a pretty good reserve up until they did the biomass boiler on campus, which they drew their reserves down, I thought, pretty significantly for, still leaving a reserve for the budget stabilization, but much smaller than what it was. So isn't that the case, if I remember right?
I don't think that's the case. I see Lori shaking her head, so that makes
No, that's not the case. The boiler was done through a bond, so we pay that back for, I think it was a 15, 20-year bond. We used the reserves to balance the budget is what we did during those years.
Okay, good. So that's good. So there are two reserve pools, one for capital and one for, so behind these numbers is another reserve pool?
Correct. And we can provide a little bit more detail at your May at the May meeting if the committee would like.
Okay, thank you. I'll turn back to the chair.
Yeah, I think that'd be useful. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Anybody else? And if I can't see you, jump in. Okay, I'm sure this will keep our eye on this over time. Thank you, Ryan. Let's now turn to UMA. We had asked a question about leases and all the centers we have system-wide, and President Zekas is prepared to walk us through the UMA centers.
Madam Chair, can I just mention one piece?
Yep.
As you just noted right there, it's hard to not have a conversation about the UMA centers and it eventually kind of morphing over to a conversation about leases as well in general. So just a reminder here, we do an annual lease report, which will be coming up sometime in the fall. We asked Gretchen in your materials provided some information on some of our large, it's not every lease across the system, but some of our larger leases, particularly at UMaine, USM, UMA. And so that information is in your packet as well. Gretchen is available if there are any particular questions about lease. Our presentation itself is going to focus on the centers, but I did want to mention that in case there were questions about leases, we're certainly available to talk about that. So thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, good morning, and thanks for the opportunity to highlight our centers, which we feel is still an integral part here of UMA, and I'm going to turn it over quickly to John Henry, so thank you.
Great. Hi, John.
Thank you. Good morning, trustees and staff and presidents. This is a familiar slide, but I'm going to revisit this to sort of set the stage for the next two. So this is a brief presentation as requested, but last time we talked about how we apportion the tuition for the centers. We have 8 centers throughout the state. And we ascribe credits around the state based on zip codes. So you can see we assign credits based on the location of the zip codes around there. And then we have a budget for each of the centers, which of course includes the leases, personnel, in a few cases, utilities and other miscellaneous expenses. The tuition that's generated here from each of those centers. And then in the green bar on the far right represents the actual net tuition minus the budgeted expenses. In this case, we're generating net $5.9 million of tuition based on a gross of $8.3 million. So about 70% or $7 out of 10 are returned back. They're not related directly to the expenses. It's important to note that for these 8 centers, we do regularly review these leases and these spaces, and we have moved centers before. We have closed centers, South Paris being the most recent one a couple of years ago. And as needs evolve, we pay close attention to what those needs are and how those learners' needs are evolving based on the region that center is located. What's an important point to make here is that these are place-bound learners. These are folks who are statewide. They don't want to, nor can they necessarily travel to a campus. And so having proximity to a place that is a public University of Maine system location is very important. They provide substantial support for many of our workforce-based programs like nursing and dental hygiene and mental health. It's very important to us. It's very part of our mission at the university. They provide high-speed internet and a place for video conferences in classrooms, formerly known as ITV or interactive television, which is now a dead term to us as we focus more on the Zoom-based, video-based learning. And high flex rooms are available as we move toward a hybridized blended learning environment in the future. And student support is particularly important for us because it provides a landing place, a place for our staff to be distributed and decentralized around the state, particularly for justice-involved students, which I'll talk about in the next slide. Each center has a student services coordinator. This is a sort of an all-in-one person who represents a wide range of advising, academic, financial aid support, recruitment, retention, networking, and outreaching. And we are flipping our advising model so that we will have student services coordinators located on the Augusta campus, the Bangor campus, and all the centers. So rather than the centers behaving like advisors on the campuses, we're asking our staff on the campuses to behave like student services coordinators to provide more wraparound support. And we are implementing an onboarding model mimicking what USM has done so successfully, requiring onboarding sessions with each new student. And that is happening right now as we have changed those job descriptions just in the last couple of weeks. Next slide. So a little more detail as requested by the trustees on these, what I call regional resources for higher education and workforce development across the state of Maine. In total, it's about 27.5 FTE employees over the 8 centers. And we do have some cost sharing of employees with Eastern Maine Community College for East Millinocket and for Holton with UMPI. We do share spaces with the Maine Community College system and some of our sisters in the system. Brunswick is shared with SMCC in Orion Hall in Brunswick Landing. East Millinocket is shared with Eastern Maine Community College. Holton with Northern Maine Community College and UMPI. And Lewiston, of course, is shared with the University of Southern Maine as we sublease some space from them. An important piece about the location of our centers is the co-location they have or adjacency to really important referral agencies. Adult education is often located in the building or in the space or very nearby. Career centers, similarly. Maine Educational Opportunity Center, or what we know as TRIO staff, who work with first-generation college-bound students, whether they be traditional or adult, are often located right in the facility, or staff visit those centers on a regular basis as part of their statewide mission based out of Orono. New Ventures Maine, our statewide entrepreneurial arm, has offices or locations in those centers. Veteran services or veteran centers are spread out throughout the state, and they regularly visit the centers to provide student veterans with services and outreach. And finally, Senior College is located in a number of our centers, also an important component of our lifelong learning that we hope to pursue in the state of Maine. As I mentioned earlier, the management of the prison education program is essential and a growing part of our mission. Our Ellsworth Center supports the Mountain View Correctional Facility in Charleston with courses and advising. Saco supports the Women's Reentry Center in Southern Maine Center. Rockland supports the Maine State Prison. That's our largest and very long and successful history and partnership there. And Brunswick has an office for our prison education program staff member, Dr. Amanda Nowak. Business and community networks are really important, and our staff in those centers are very involved with chambers of commerce, economic development boards, downtown alliances, regional workforce development boards, and a number of other things locally. They get it. They understand that if you want access to adults for learning, if you want to promote that we are here for degree completion or to provide certificates or some other sort of training, it's important to be involved with the local economies and the local communities. And finally, the Working Communities Challenge grants, the Boston Federal Reserve grants that many of us know about, Lewiston, East Millinocket, we are integrally part of those grants, and as those grants move forward in New England. So you can see it really does make a difference to have this footprint in part of our statewide mission throughout the state of Maine. Next slide. I could talk for another 5 minutes, but I think if we just close with what the students say. Last year, when beginning an ad campaign for what we call Where is Your Classroom, we did a number of ads. We asked some students from all over the university, particularly the centers, what does it mean to them? And here are 5 student responses. Sean from Waterville said that having Saco so close to where he lives, being able to take classes online has been so convenient, and he has no internet at home. Tina from Millinocket is grateful for UMA and the fact that technology has come so far, she can finally further her education, something that she didn't think she would ever be able to do. Matthew from Rumford says being able to use video conferencing at the center provided with a quality education and convenience without having to travel to a larger campus. Amy from Rockland says it really succinctly, I don't know what I would do without URock, as we affectionately call the University Center in Rockland. And finally, Seth from Some J really says it very well here, pictured with his child, that he takes video classes at his local center and going to school. He was going to school for his father, but now he realizes he's doing it for his daughter so that he can prove that no matter what age you are, you can do anything. We are really grateful for these comments from students because I think it exemplifies to the student why we're there, why these centers matter, and the difference they're making throughout the communities and the regional towns in the state of Maine. I hope that answers some fundamental questions. It does not address the leases, but as Ryan said, I believe there's more detail coming later about the nature of the leases for these centers. I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks, Jonathan. Can I just ask a point of clarification? There are 42 centers, but you're talking about 8 in this presentation?
There are not 42 centers. There are 8 staffed centers around the state where we actually have staff FT. There are some sites, what we call community sites,
right,
which is essentially a Zoom, it's a Zoom cart so that a student at Jackman High School or at Telstar in Bethel could take a class and sit in a room and be beamed in, if you will, to a class, but there are no staff on those sites. Joe, do you want to jump in there and add anything to that? Or?
No, it's part of the partnerships that we have done tied to some RUS grants, just to provide, again, statewide locational opportunities for students.
But we pay for those sites as well, correct?
The payment is very minimal, but I don't think there's any major either revenue or cost there. It's really providing the equipment and modest technical support when needed.
Okay. And did you take in this presentation? Did you take all your enrollment and assign it by zip code to one of the centers?
No, we did. We asked each of the center directors about 6 years ago to say, tell us who in your catchment area, the zip codes of the towns that you have seen or that you serve. So we ascribed those zip codes to the 8 centers. And truthfully, some of these students are online. They may or may not use the centers, but our students are known for switching modes of instruction routinely. A student in one semester could attend a live video class in Rockland, drive to Augusta for a class, and then do a third class online. So it makes it difficult to track where our students actually think of their home campus or their home center because they change their behavior so frequently. But we do notice the combination of flexibility that's most valuable. So yes, we have to ascribe, but we do that for Augusta as well in Bangor, but it's harder to do with the centers because of the behavior change of students. But I think it's the fairest way to look at it, and it's the way we use it to ascribe the costs and the actual instructional benefit. That's a great question.
Other questions, comments? Trustee Cates.
Thank you. John, thanks for that. And Joe, thanks for the presentation. So for instance, Rockland, 7,800 credit hours, all of those are taking place at the center. Most of them are, some of them are. How do we know that? In other words, if we did away with the centers, which obviously we're not going to do, how many of those credit hours would we lose as a result of that? Some of them are just online.
Let's just say we have a wide variety of modalities. We try to have live sections in the centers to kind of build the cohort and kind of build that community. But basically after that, usually after the first year, almost all of them are online. So if the centers weren't here, then we would be doing much more online, and the credits would more likely transfer. You know, there'd be probably some loss of people who prefer a specific type of modality, but it wouldn't be, you know, I'm not as concerned about that.
So out of the 34,000 credit hours, do you have any kind of sense about how many of those are done at the center as opposed to online?
So I'm going to say I think we have about, at least at Rockland specifically, I think we have about 10 sections that we run. So we'll say about 10 students in that. So it's 100, so about 300 credit hours probably of live instruction there. So
300 credit hours in Rockland of live instruction and the rest online?
Oh, well, so there's live instruction, there's the synchronous instruction as well, and that probably takes another couple hundred credits as well. And then the rest of it is basically completely online, where they're there for all the support options, right? So this is the thing. So although it's distance, they come there for the high-speed internet, or they come for the student service options, or the community, the cohort building.
Roger, to answer your question a little more deeply, before the pandemic, we were about 55% online, 45% live instruction. And by live, it could mean the professor standing in front of you or standing in another city and you're joining real-time video. But during the pandemic, we went as high as 70% online for obvious reasons during the pandemic. And as the pandemic subsides, we hope to go back to closer to 50 to 60% online with more face-to-face instruction at the centers and of course on the campuses as well.
Thanks, John. One other question, the budget, what is that for each of the centers? What does that include? What goes into that number for expense?
Buster, do you want to jump in here or would you like me to?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. That would include all of the personnel costs that individuals working at the center would include the lease that we pay. Some leases we pay utilities, other leases we don't. It just depends on how the lease is written. So any operating expenses directly associated with the center are included in that.
Faculty costs or not?
No, not the faculty cost or not.
Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah, we have no full-time faculty at the centers. Most of those are adjuncts, and we do have some full-time faculty who do make the circuit and go to centers to run some of their synchronized classes. But the full-time faculty are either on the Bangor or the Augusta campus.
Other questions?
Oh, Trustee Riley?
Yes, President Rice.
If I might just to add to Trustee Cates' question, the Holton Center is a facility of UMPI, and it's a unique partnership because UMA provides financial support to the facility based on a proportion in an agreement. But to answer Trustee Cates' question about the Holton Center, certainly we've seen a movement away from what you would call face-to-face in-person instruction at the center to synchronous live instruction that is received by students through the center. And it really provides support services either through tutoring or other student support services through the center in an increased percentage as to what its credit hour generation was certainly before COVID, and even 5 or 6 years prior to that. So we've definitely seen changes in the use of the center, particularly in regards to face-to-face instruction.
Great, thanks. Chancellor? You're muted, Chancellor. Anybody else while the Chancellor deals with his issues? We're waiting. Uh-oh. Okay. Technical issues at the system. Sorry. Anybody else? Ryan, when we get to the lease report, I would find it very useful because I think, part of Roger's questions is kind of like, what would be the occupancy rate of these places? How often are people there? How essential are they? Because I think you've made a very compelling case for what they do. But I wonder if when we look at the lease report, we could look at a map that includes all of the systems, offsite presence, cooperative extension, the UMA centers and sites, and just get a flavor for the reach of all that activity and its expense.
We can absolutely do that. Chip and I were having an offline discussion back when we did the facilities review with the trustees, and I think we talked about this last week. We had this handy little map of Maine that had all of the sites and the centers and cooperative extension and campus locations. And as you would imagine, it was a really busy map, but also very informative. And so we're having some conversations about updating that if we need to, and we can absolutely get that for the committee.
Great.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know, Gretchen, if there's anything you wanted to add, or we usually don't get a lot of publicity for the lease report, but maybe Gretchen, if you have a second, could you just talk a little bit about what we do include in the report, and then again, I think we're happy to emphasize it as much as the committee would like when we present that.
Sure, thank you. So historically, for the annual lease report, we've included data about the number of leases where the university is a lessee, so we're leasing space from others, as well as the other side where we report on the space that the university actually leases out to third parties as well. That generates revenue. When we are a lessee, that is an expense to the university. So we do appreciate the board's questions. I do anticipate updating the annual lease report this year to provide additional detail. Historically, what we've reported on is the actual annual cost of the lease when we're leasing space from others. That has not historically included additional details, for example, in terms of additional fees or costs related to utilities. So we will be working on including that because it does impact the overall expense related to the actual lease. With that being said, we have in the slides provided for you included an estimate for what those expenses would be. Based on Sightlines data, we can estimate that the average cost per square foot when we are paying for utilities would be about $7 per square foot. We do expect that that will also go up because, as Rudy was mentioning in his presentation, the costs for energy are going up. So we expect that that rate will also go up and will account for that. In addition, we will be working with the work control area to try to get a better grasp on the cost for these utilities for running these centers. The data provided to you is an estimate, but we do hope to get a better tracking of the cost for those utilities as well and provide you with more accurate data related to that.
Yeah, thank you. And I think our interest is more in, from looking at the budget, just where are their revenue sources and where are their potential efficiencies? So sort of the big picture of the role leases play. Anybody else? All right, great. Well, with the drum roll, we are moving on to our capital plan.
I think the chancellor was trying to jump in, but I saw his lips moving, but I don't think his audio's back.
I don't think it is. Chancellor, when you get your audio, jump in, because I can't necessarily see you. Still no. Okay. I'm sure he'll get some help and get with us soon. And do I turn to Carolyn, Ryan, or do you want to set this up?
We can jump right into Carolyn.
Okay, Carolyn McDonough.
All right. Good morning again. Thank you. Actually, this is the presentation of the one-year capital plan. I'm actually going to hand it over to Nate Harris, but before I do that, I just want to do a quick introduction of Nate. He's joined my team just a little over a month ago, and so throwing him right into the fire here. He is our Associate Director of Capital Planning for Capital Planning, and he's going to present this morning the one-year capital plan overview, including both the operating funds and the all funds. This information is based on the capital plans that each individual campus has put together and put in the gigantic Airtable spreadsheet for us. And Nate has taken that information and created the presentation we have for you today. So take it away, Nate.
Great. Thank you, Carolyn. I'm going to share my screen here for you all. And here we go. Make sure this shares properly. All right. And so you should all see the first slide of the presentation.
We do.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. And thanks, Carolyn, again, for that nice introduction. As Carolyn said, this is your fiscal year 23 capital investment plan. And this is the result of a lot of hard work that's been done at the campuses, putting together their individual plans. We've had a lot of help, David Jones, pulling all that information out of Airtable to get it into a format that I could actually use and go through. And then Gordian was able to take a look through our data to see how it looks compared to some previous years. And so we're going to start out, I'm just going to walk through kind of where we are in the capital planning process, give an overview from the system level of those funds, both operating and all funds, and then do a quick review how all the universities are planning to spend their money this coming fiscal year. So the operating funds that we're going to be talking about today reflect the same projects that were presented previously to the FFT. But this is your opportunity, this is your first opportunity to see how all funds are being brought together and planned for capital projects in the coming fiscal year. You'll have an opportunity to see all these projects again, come up on 4 May, and then the entire Board of Trustees will be voting on the capital plan come 23 May. So here's a quick look at the operating funds from a system level. As you can see, $13.7 million. This is a significant increase over the FY22 plan, which was $10.6 million. And this slide right here just shows you how those funds are allocated across the different universities. We take that same data.
I think we've got the chancellor trying to get in.
Yes.
Great.
Here we take the that same operating funds and then we look at what type of projects that's going to be spent on. And here's a breakout for your review.
Nate, could you just on that just explain the difference between renovation and space renewal?
Right. So renovation, we think about a much more extensive work, going down to the studs, if you will, in a facility, replacing some of the systems that we talk about, versus a renewal. You're kind of just cleaning up the space, maybe carpet, paint. Yep. Absolutely. And so here you can see how we're going through. Here's our all funds. So now this is bringing in all the sources of funding that the university is going to use towards their capital projects. $144.6 million. Again, a significant increase over last year. When we look at the same data set for last year, we're looking at $91 million that was planned for. And so again, here's your allocation by university. And this next slide will again show you the types of projects. And so you can see, as has been typical, a majority of the money is going towards new space. However, I do want to point out the $16.8 million is going to building systems. That's a significant increase over the 1.6 million that was planned for this last year. And so when you think of building systems, think of your HVAC systems, plumbing, electrical, these are the bones of the facility. They're going to extend its life. So I think it's really critical that the money is being focused in that area. Of that $16.8 million, $13 million is going towards that heating, ventilation, air conditioning projects, renovations, upgrades, and replacements. Now, when we dive into the individual campuses, here's a quick look at University of Maine and University of Maine Machias. Here are their operating funds and how they plan to spend those. And then here's when we look at all of their funds together. So $62.7 million. Here's a quick look at UMA. And as we look at UMA and the rest of the universities after this, you will see their operating funds on the left side and all funds on the right side. Here's Farmington and their plan. Here's Fort Kent. Here's UMPI. And finally, here is University of Southern Maine. And so this last slide is taking a look at the Gordian data historically. And just to kind of gauge what we're looking at, we've been talking about $144.6 million. Now we're talking about $48.7 million. The difference is what Gordian is focused on are the expenses or the money we're going to spend that are going to existing facilities to extend their life or decrease the backlog of maintenance in those facilities. So things like new space, removals, athletic fields, grounds, or utility infrastructure are not counted towards this dollar amount. But even after taking all of that out, you can see this $48.7 million is a significant investment in our existing facilities. And in fact, you can look at the last time I think we hit the target Gordian set was back in FY13. So it has been a while since we've hit a target they've set for us to keep up our facilities. And in this case, we've met it and exceeded it. So I think that's a testament to the work the universities are doing and the focus on keeping their existing facilities up to date. And so see, I will stop sharing and I'll see if you have any questions.
Great.
Great.
Thank you. Questions?
Madam Chair?
Yep, Ryan?
Could I just mention one piece? And maybe Nate, you could just bring up that next to last slide just for a second.
Sure.
One of the challenges of data anyway, university data, is it always feels like we're looking backwards. We're waiting for the data to catch up. And so certainly for my fellow CBOs, the first time we saw the Gordian presentation this year, I was about as frustrated as I've ever been, because I feel like, and it's true of this committee's agenda, that everything we're doing is facilities related and we're making these huge investments, but the data doesn't show it until we've got a building coming up. And so when I looked at that Gordian chart for the first time and saw how far we were below that line of just breaking even, it was really, really frustrating. And so I really appreciate the work that Carolyn and Nate and others have done to kind of be a little more forward looking and to show essentially the impact of all of the work that the campuses have been doing, that this committee has been doing over the course of the last year. And you can finally start to see that improvement in 22, but certainly by the time you get out to 23. And again, this is existing space. If you see the footnote down at the bottom, it's not including lots of other campus infrastructure work that we're doing. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, point that out, because it really is a big deal for a lot of us that have been working on in this area, in this space for, going back to 2000, well before 2013 and stuff. It can be frustrating to dedicate so much time and yet not move the needle. And so now we're to the point, again, where we're starting to see that needle move. And we know we've got other projects in the queue that we're not even reflecting yet. So I just wanted to take a second to acknowledge that work, to thank everyone that's been doing this. And it's great to see progress.
It is indeed. Thanks. Trustee Cates, did I have you in the queue?
Thank you. Just what is set aside? There's a line in all those tickets for set aside. What is that?
So those are typically for some of the universities, and University of Maine is probably the one that does this the most, but they take some funds like those that are identified for funded depreciation, for example, and they just put those into a pot of money to address any pop-up maintenance things that come up in their facility. So they don't have a specific plan, like this is going to go to a specific facility, but this is to address any big maintenance issues that come up during the next fiscal year.
Others, I can't necessarily see you all, so jump in. I had a question on USM, 90% of expenditure on new space. They're only meeting 52% of the Gordian target. Can we
Right.
get a little?
Sure. And so obviously they have a lot of new construction going on
Right.
now. And so most of that money is going towards Portland Commons, the Career and Student Success Center, and the parking garage. They do have, as you can see, almost $3 million going to systems, so HVAC type of projects specifically. And so even though they're only meeting 55% of the Gordian, again, if you look historically, the system has barely broken 40% of meeting the Gordian target. So this, even though that's less, I think it's a little bit skewed right now because of the new construction that's going on here.
Anybody else? Is there a way, that list at the end that you didn't show on your slides of individual projects by campus?
Mm-hmm.
Could we do a crosswalk to the Gordian list of, and I recognize that Gordian is not written in stone, but it would be interesting to see how the list of projects by campus relate to the Gordian classification of buildings at risk.
Yeah. So we're talking about the 48 million that the Gordian identified that we are going to spend.
Gordian does a list by campus, by building, on what should be demolished, what has a potential for upgrade. It's sort of a priority list. And again, I know that the Gordian priorities don't always equate to the campus priorities, but it would be an interesting review.
Yeah, that is something we can certainly take a look at.
Great. Anybody?
Can you hear me now?
Chancellor. Yes, we can.
All right. Back in my office. One of the things I would say about Southern Maine is you did receive, at least one of the committees received, I think it was this committee, an update on one of the oldest buildings on the campus and plans to renovate that. So in fairness, they are in fact looking at a rather large investment in an existing structure, which is currently woefully inadequate with respect to maintenance and investment. So in fairness, I should point that out.
Yep, good point. Thanks.
And then as long as I have it for a moment, I want to go back if you have a second, I want to do that.
Absolutely. Make up for lost time.
I think it's time to set up a system to track on a daily basis the use of the centers. So that we can understand whether we're investing wisely or not. And if we use the remaining time this semester and over the summer to set up an actual daily tracking system of who's using the center, how it's staffed on a daily basis and the like, I think that would put us, if we did that for a semester, I think it would put us in a far better way to make judgments about what's driving success. Obviously, 34,000 credit hours is a lot of credit hours. But the question is how many of those credit hours are actually being served as opposed to reported, which I think was the point you were trying to get at. And that's what I was trying to get on. So we'll have an internal discussion about whether we could set up a daily tracking system for staff and usage.
That's great. I think that would be hugely helpful.
Ryan, get it done, will you?
All over it.
All right.
Madam Chair.
I know there are 2 sites in Brunswick, so I'll just check them out.
No, but I mean, in fairness, I think I'm hearing the trustees, they want more knowledge about how we're spending the money. It's a lot of money to spend. It's a lot of credits. If it's supporting that, let's figure out how many credits it's actually supporting.
Great. Ryan, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I wonder if Alec might just briefly let the committee know about plans going forward, because one of the things with the new space, Alec and the USM team have dedicated a lot of the new revenue coming from that space back into deferred maintenance, and it's right directly to your point. And so just wanted to give Alec just a minute to touch on that.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Ryan. Morning, everyone. So with respect particularly to the residence hall, because the university system's financing that, USM's paying the debt service annually, when we model that out, there's a significant amount of cash flow to the bottom line, even in the first year. We're north of $500,000, and that's after filling a repair and replacement account. By agreement with the system controller, that money will flow directly into USM's CapEx account for the following fiscal year. So it effectively creates a deferred maintenance annuity.
Great. Thank you for the reminder. other questions, concerns, need for information?
If there aren't any other questions, I just want to offer a wrap-up comment.
Please do.
Just wanted to let people know, sort of a reminder from Chip's capital planning overview presentation back in January that, bringing Nate on in this position is going to help improve our process, but we're also working with a third-party reviewer, Deb Poudry, who's a capital planning expert, and she's looking at our process as a whole and going to provide some feedback and suggestions on any ways that we might be able to improve the process. We're looking forward to presenting the findings of that later this year.
Great, wonderful, thank you. Okay, so this is open question time for anything that came up during this discussion. There's a great deal of information exchanged. Committee's been very quiet. That's not like you, so I suspect there are questions yet to be asked. Anybody?
Chair, quick question. Nate, this is probably more toward you. In terms of as we do these retrofits or these remodels, do we have efficiency kind of top in mind as we're doing it, and do we try to quantify some of this investment in terms of, are we becoming more efficient in terms of oil usage or heating consumption, electricity, etc.?
Yes, thank you for that question. Absolutely. As the campuses sit down and they actually come up with their renovation plan and they start working with the project manager and the different construction firms, that is certainly one of the aspects that they are looking at. So if you look at some of these projects, some of them are detailed to replacing windows for better efficiency, replacing boilers that are old and outdated, that are going to improve your utility bills. So that is all a component of those renovations that are looked at.
And then maybe a follow-up question, Nate, to that is, I'm new to FFT, but and maybe some of you on this call know this already, but it seems like we have a variety of different heating sources for different campuses, different buildings. Has there been any thought of some level of standardization or some kind of process to evaluate the current configurations, and then moving forward we use a specific type kind of situation?
I can help out with that one, I think. And Carolyn, I'd look to you to help jump in, and any of my colleagues who want to correct or clarify. So some of the reason for diversity, Trustee Bartholomew, that you see is that we've had over the past decade, up until probably 2 years ago, putting the University of Maine aside for the moment, fairly robust effort to review all the fuel use on all of the campuses and try to figure out if, frankly, any fuel switching would be advantageous to the campuses, both from a cost and a fuel diversity and a greenhouse gas perspective. So we have moved substantially over the past 12 years or so from a primarily oil dependent system to using relatively little oil today. So we have 2 campuses that are primarily using biomass, and they are the campuses that are located in the wood baskets of Maine, Farmington and Fort Kent, campuses that have been able to get piped natural gas, have looked at and in many cases converted to, if they were not already using natural gas, at least as a transition fuel, something that is cleaner typically than oil, even if it may not be 100-year solution, perhaps a 40 or 50-year solution from when they started. And the University of Maine is thick in the process of reviewing their energy infrastructure with an eye towards making a move there to replace their core central heat plant. That's also involved at least a couple of campuses moving from distributed energy, meaning lots of buildings with different HVAC systems, to consolidated heat plants for efficiency purposes. But at this point, there is some thought that the diversity of our energy sources across the system from campus to campus, less so from building to building, but across the campuses, represents a strength that different campuses have utilized the resources that are best suited to that particular location. And we do work carefully with third-party energy advisors and with the FFT whenever we make that that kind of a move, or propose to make that kind of a move for your consideration. So it's not without thought that we have the diversity that you're seeing, I guess, is the short version of all of that.
Thank you. And impressive to move away from fossil fuels as fast as we have. Anything else? I think the fact that we are early reflects the good work by Ryan and his team to really drill down on all the questions we've asked him in advance. So I appreciate that very much. It's been really informative. But are there other pieces of information?
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
Just a quick question, probably for Chip. Given that our operations are relatively slow in the summertime, given that electricity prices peak in the summertime, are there any opportunities for us to go off the grid, have shutdowns for several hours, so we can actually get paid by not being a consumer of electricity from the transmission and distribution contractors we use?
So a couple of things. We're busier in the summer than is commonly understood sometimes, Trustee McMahon, and we do have robust operations, whether they're summer camps or summer academic programs or summer semester or whatnot. It's rare that we would actually be in a position to close a campus per se. So point one, point two, you're correct though. We do often have reduced operations. Campuses do take certain actions already today in terms of, for example, reducing the number of boilers that they're operating if they have a multiple boiler, central heating plant, and that type of thing. In terms of electricity, the thing that we currently do that is closest to what you're describing is we do pay fairly close attention, very close attention to those peak days of electricity demand as forecasted by our energy advisor when the T&D rates are set typically for maximum draw. And we do things like reduce lighting, adjust heating set points. Occasionally, if we have licensed energy generation on campus, generate a little bit of our own energy. Less so in recent years, but even in some past years where there was real need to do so, shutting down partial elevator banks, not entirely shutting them down, but partial elevator banks. So it's that type of thing is what we've done in the past. Certainly can revisit that if there's a particular interest on the part of trustees, but it's an active area. We do have a system-wide energy team in addition to the facilities directors that brings together the facilities directors, the sustainability directors on the various campuses. They often meet directly with CES, often bring in also the Energy Maine team from state government to talk about what the current opportunities are for doing the best job that we can do with energy. It is a major cost for most campuses. We try to attack it from multiple perspectives. I'd also mention, it hasn't come up given the nature of the conversation this morning, it hasn't come up, but I think it's worth mentioning, given this discussion, that the University of Southern Maine also has piloted an ESCO approach to energy savings using the collaboration of a third partner to identify reduce energy consumption. So on the demand side versus on the supply side, to reduce energy consumption in our facilities. They're seeing a measurable decrease in energy consumption in the targeted buildings through more energy efficient appliances and also some education of the users of the facility. And a couple of additional campuses are looking at expanding on that approach now as well. So we really try to tackle energy from multiple perspectives to try to keep that cost down as much as we can.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Anyone else or any other issues? Trustee Cates?
You're still muted, Trustee Cates.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Just as we'll come out of the pandemic, I'll totally have figured out my mute. It's probably for you, Chip, but when we go out to public bid for energy costs, we're obviously a large customer, so presumably we get some better bids that way. Any thought to trying to combine ourselves with the community college system to make us even a larger customer and perhaps even be better?
We do. There are a number of things that go into consideration of bidding our energy. Depends on where the campus is located, what energy you're talking about. I mean, some of you may remember that really spend a lot of time thinking about energy. It used to be in Maine, you went out to bid for oil at the beginning of August every year. It was always when the lowest prices were. Everybody used oil, and if you wanted to lock in a rate, that was when you did it. All the municipalities went out at the same time, pretty much. They often form consortiums. Unfortunately, those days are gone. And we really work closely with CES to both figure out when and for how long to do our bids, for what period of time are we interested in getting prices, when are we going to put that bid on the street. They monitor the energy markets every day to help guide us on when would be the most advantageous time to put a bid on the street for the different types of energy sources, whether it's a liquid fuel or a gas fuel or a trucked fuel or a piped fuel or electricity. And it really varies quite a bit these days about when and for how long and who goes out when. So I would be well over my skis, Trustee Cates, if I tried to tell you what the details of that were at this time, but I know that it has exceeded my ability to keep up with it at that level of granularity. And we really do work very closely with CES to try to make sure that we're timing those things as best we can, locking when we should, not locking when we shouldn't, hedging when it's possible. Occasionally at our larger campuses, even selling back into the marketplace. If we've got a contract that's advantageous for us to sell back into the marketplace. But your bottom line point is correct, which is we're a large institutional customer and we act like a large institutional customer. We go out to bid for everything that we can. We try to do that at the right time and the right volume and with the right partners. And we include, it's a little bit harder to do with electricity, but we do include piggyback provisions for other public entities and work closely with, particularly with not only the community college system, but increasingly with our state of Maine colleagues about how they're doing business as well.
Thanks.
Great. Others?
I should mention, Trustee Riley, that a number of my colleagues that are doing additional energy things that I have not mentioned, although I feel like I'm mentioning a lot, are pinging me in the background here. What about this? What about that? So even with the variety of things that I'm mentioning to you, there are additional steps that we're taking. The passive house at USM or the passive construction approach at USM is another good example. So I think the one thing I would mention is that we haven't found it to be successful to pick the one true path. So you will see a diversity of efforts as we try to use many tools, both on the supply side and on the demand side, to do the best job we can to limit both consumption and the cost of the consumption that's necessary to our operations. Another one that I have not mentioned today is, we did participate pretty robustly in the state's new renewable energy program for billing offsets. So we're going to be buying a lot more renewable energy going forward than we have been able to do in the past. And there'll be some opportunities potentially to monetize that to further enhance all of our energy efforts. So there's a lot of focus on energy.
Good. And I think the partnerships among public purchases is really important. Others? Seeing none, we have, again, thank you to Ryan and team for putting, and everyone for putting such, Robert and everyone putting together great responses to our questions. I think it was very clear, judging from the fact that we're an hour early almost. So anybody else? If not, we're done. Thank you very much. See you at the board meeting.